It is a Sunday morning, not a special one. The kind where the light comes in at a low angle and the coffee is hot and there is nowhere you have to be for a few hours. And you're sitting there with your phone and you open your brokerage app not because anything happened, not because you're worried, just because you check it the way you check the weather. And the number is there, $750,000, and you sit with it for a second. And then you ask yourself a question that you have probably asked before but never quite like this. When does this actually start to feel real? Because here is the strange thing about building wealth over a long period of time. The number grows, but the feeling does not always grow with it. You remember when 10,000 felt like something, and then 25, and then 100. And each time the number crossed a new threshold, you expected to feel different, and instead you just felt like you with a bigger number on a screen. And now you are staring at $750,000 on a Sunday morning, and part of you is waiting for the moment when it clicks, when it stops being a number and starts being a life. When the thing you have been building all these years stops living in an app and starts living in the actual texture of your days. That moment is what today's video is about, because $750,000 is not just a number. It is a threshold that changes things in ways that are real and specific, and that most financial content never actually explains. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what changes, why it changes, and what you need to do differently to make sure you actually feel it. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe right now, because every week on this channel we talk about the real psychology of building wealth, not just the math, the way money changes how you think and feel and move through your life. I'm David Marshall, and I have spent over a decade obsessed with these thresholds, these specific moments in a financial journey where the rules quietly change and most people do not even realize they have crossed into new territory. $750,000 is one of those moments, and I do not want you to walk past it without understanding what you are standing in. Let us start with the number that reframes everything. At $750,000 invested following what is called the 4% rule, which is the most widely studied sustainable withdrawal rate for long-term portfolios, your investments generate roughly $30,000 per year. That is $2,500 every single month, without you doing a single thing, without you showing up anywhere, without you answering to anyone. $2,500 a month just appearing, produced by the mass of what you built, the same way a river flows because of the geography it carved over years. Now I want you to sit with what that actually means in practical terms, because I think the way people frame passive income is often too abstract to land. $2,500 a month is not private jet money. It does not change your zip code money, but here is what it is. It is your car payment and insurance covered without your job. It is your groceries and your utilities handled before you open your laptop on Monday morning. It is a rent payment in a significant portion of American cities. It is a parallel financial life running quietly alongside your regular life, asking nothing of you, requiring none of your time, none of your energy, none of your presence. It just runs. And the psychological effect of having a parallel income stream that exists completely independently of your labor is something that is almost impossible to fully describe until you feel it, because it is not just about the money, it is about what the money represents, which is that your life is no longer entirely contingent on your continued performance. There is something underneath you now, a floor. And knowing the floor is there changes how you stand. This brings me to something I think about a lot and that I want to share with you, because I think it explains a personality phenomenon that most people completely misread. You have probably met people in your life who just seem calm, not checked out, not oblivious, but genuinely, sustainably calm. The kind of person who does not seem rattled when their job gets complicated or when something in their life goes sideways. And you might have assumed it was temperament. You might have thought they were just wired differently, that they have some natural equanimity you do not have. And maybe sometimes that is true, but I want to offer you a different explanation that I think is true far more often than people realize. Chill people are often just people with high optionality. What looks like a personality trait is frequently a financial condition. When you have runway, when you have a buffer large enough that a bad month at work, or a difficult conversation with your boss, or an unexpected expense does not immediately threaten your stability, you naturally become calmer. Not because you are suppressing anything, but because the actual stakes of any given moment are genuinely lower. The things that make people anxious, that make people reactive, that make people feel trapped in decisions they hate, are almost always downstream of financial pressure. Remove the pressure and you do not just improve someone's finances, you change who they seem to be. $750,000 is the level where that shift starts to become structural, not theoretical, structural, where the runway is long enough that it actually changes your nervous system's relationship to uncertainty, where the floor is real enough that you can feel it, and where $2,500 a month in parallel income means that whatever happens at work on any given Tuesday, you still have something working for you. That is not just financial security. That is a different way of moving through the world. Now let me show you something about the math at this level that I think will genuinely stop you for a second. Because this is where the physics of wealth building do something that feels almost impossible if you have spent years in the early and middle stages of accumulation, where progress is slow and grinding and dependent almost entirely on your own consistent behavior. At $750,000, assuming a fairly conservative 7% average annual return, your portfolio grows by more than $52,000 in a single year. $52,000 added to your net worth in 12 months without you contributing a single additional dollar, just from the mass of what is already there doing what money at scale does. Now compare that to where you started. When you had $10,000 invested at 7%, you gained $700 that year. When you had $50,000, you gained $3,500. When you had $100,000, you gained $10,000. At every stage, the percentage was the same, but the dollar amount was determined by the mass underneath it. And now at $750,000, the mass is large enough that the annual growth exceeds what most Americans earn in a full year of work. The money is now growing faster than you can meaningfully add to it through contributions alone. This is what I mean when I say escape velocity. You have reached the point where the portfolio has enough gravitational pull that it is generating its own momentum. You are no longer pushing it up a hill. It is moving under its own weight. And your job has fundamentally changed from accumulator to steward. From someone building the thing to someone tending the thing that is now largely building itself. And this brings me to the piece of this video that I think is the most emotionally resonant and the one I most want you to carry with you. Because the math is important and the psychology is important, but there is something about reaching $750,000 that goes beyond both of those things. It is about time and the relationship between decisions you made years ago and the life you are living right now. Here is how I think about it. Every time you contributed to your investment account over the years, every time you automated the transfer and left it alone, every time you did not touch it when the market dropped and everything felt uncertain, every time you chose the future version of yourself over the present comfort of spending that money on something that would not matter in 5 years, you were sending a letter. A letter to a version of yourself that did not exist yet. A version of yourself who would be sitting on a Sunday morning with a coffee and a brokerage app and a number that felt both surreal and deeply real at the same time. You were writing to that person, telling them you believed in them, telling them you were going to make their life different even though you could not fully picture who they would be yet. And you sent those letters for years, month after month, without a reply, without confirmation that they were arriving. Without any evidence except a slowly growing number that did not feel like much for a very long time. $750,000 is the day the letters arrive. All of them at once, not as a dramatic event, not as a moment with music and fanfare. But as a quiet Sunday morning where the light comes in low and the coffee is hot, and you look at a number on a screen and something in you recognizes, maybe for the first time with your whole body and not just your brain, that it worked, that you did it. That the person you were 10 or 15 years ago, the one making small, consistent choices that felt invisible, was writing to you this whole time. And you are finally holding the letters. That is what $750,000 really is. Not a destination, not a finish line, but the moment when the conversation between your past self and your future self finally becomes audible, when the compound interest stops being a chart and starts being a morning, when the decisions you made in the dark start to show up in the light. So what do you do from here? Because this is where a lot of people get stuck, not because they have done anything wrong, but because nobody tells them that the rules change again at this level. You stop obsessing over the amount you contribute and you start obsessing over structure, fees, tax efficiency, asset allocation that matches your actual timeline and your actual risk tolerance and not some default setting you established years ago. You start thinking about how to protect what you have built as seriously as you thought about building it. Because at $750,000, a 1% fee is $7,500 a year walking out the door. A poorly timed tax decision can cost you more in a single year than you contributed in several. The optimization conversation shifts from inputs to structure, from how much you save to how intelligently you manage what you have. And emotionally, you give yourself permission to feel this, not to become complacent, but to actually register what you have done. Because one of the quiet tragedies I have observed in people who build significant wealth is that they never stop running long enough to feel what they built. They hit a milestone and immediately recalibrate to the next one without ever inhabiting the current one. And the result is that they spend their entire financial life arriving somewhere without ever feeling like they have arrived. $750,000 is worth stopping for, worth letting it land. Worth asking yourself, not frantically but with genuine curiosity, what does my life get to look like now? People ask me what the point of all this is. Why build wealth? Why sacrifice the immediate comfort? Why play the long game when the short game is so much more available? And the answer I keep coming back to is never about yachts. It is never about the dramatic external signals of having made it. The people I have seen who genuinely build wealth and genuinely feel free describe something much quieter. They say there is more oxygen in the room. They say decisions feel lighter. They say they stopped doing things out of fear and started doing things out of choice. They say Sunday mornings feel different. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because the weight that used to be there is just gone. And what replaced it is space, options, the quiet and profound freedom of a life that is no longer entirely contingent on what happens at work this week. That is what $750,000 is really pointing toward. Not the number, the morning, the coffee, the low light. The feeling of reading letters from a version of yourself who believed in you before you had any proof you deserved it. Subscribe to David Marshall Finance right now if this video gave you a new way of seeing your journey, because every single week we go deeper into the real psychology of building wealth and what it actually feels like when it starts to work. Like this video if it landed somewhere real for you, and leave a comment below. Tell me where you are. Are you still sending the letters or are they starting to arrive? I read every single one. I will see you in the next video.